So first of all, welcome to everybody that's come today. Really appreciate you giving up your time and joining us. We hope you find the updates interesting and helpful in terms of the journey that we've been on over the last year. So our agenda today is after I've finished, I'll invite Richard up and he'll go through the general update, including the strategy and our developments on that for the next 5 years. Nick will talk about the clinical strategy and the progress that we've made on that, which is great, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute, Mike, that yours is not interesting, but Mike will be doing the finance section for us and giving details of our full accounts for 22-23. But before we go on to the agenda, I just wanted to add a few words for myself. I've been chairman now of the organisation just over a year, and it continues to be an absolute privilege to serve this organisation and to serve the population and the region across the East Midlands. For those of you that do know me, I've been in the NHS a long time, and I have to say, this for me, this role is the icing on the cake. It's a wonderful point in my career, and I feel very proud of that. So, as an organisation, we've come a long way, as I've said. The last year, as I think my exec colleagues will agree that I've put them through the paces, and we've moved at quite a considerable pace. But that's good, because for me, that's about putting energy into the organisation. And that will help us to improve. We've got good foundations, excellent foundations that were laid before by Pauline Tagg, who was our former chairwoman. But in terms of the improvement for us, it's about improving the services that we give to our patients and everybody that we serve. And equally important is to our workforce, to our staff, because to me, we can't do any of the work that we're doing if we haven't got that good workforce and the work ethic. And we're continuing to develop that. And one of my strong values is about compassionate leadership. And I want to really reinforce that. And recently, Richard and I were in a meeting with our staff side representatives, and I think it was a real big compliment when one of them said, "The compassionate leadership is dripping through, Karen," and I think that's excellent, because we won't please everybody all of the time, but we'll try and do our best. The ambulance service, just like everywhere else in the NHS, is going through very turbulent times at the moment, and we have to come together to confront that and to take forward our organisation, but equally not be consumed by the negativity. We have to stay focused despite the press and the difficult situation that we find ourselves in there. So that apart, we've made some great achievements. As I said, this last year has been good. It's been energised, and I'm sure Richard will be pleased to tell you all about the progress that we've made. So my genuine thanks to everybody in EMAS for you being here today, and continuing to serve the public in the way that we do. Thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Henson, the Chief Executive of East Midlands Ambulance Service, and very proud to be here with you all today. Thank you for the introduction, Karen. So this morning I'm going to talk through a number of areas, quite a wide, varied number of topics, and then I'll hand it over to other executive colleagues this morning. Now, first and foremost, I think it's really important to be able to demonstrate some of the fantastic achievements that many of our colleagues have received. So we've had colleagues who have been recognised both locally, regionally, and indeed nationally. So the first one is former paramedic from Nottinghamshire, was Cheveline Camps, who was nominated in the Queen's Birthday Honours List. So an absolutely fantastic achievement for Cheveline. We've also had Rutland the community first responder Barbara Crellin again recognised in the honours. So a fantastic achievement for both of those colleagues. Paramedic Rob Ferrell, who has been recognised for his efforts to support a Ukrainian family escaping the war, which absolutely, this is something which we will all absolutely respect and acknowledge, a phenomenal achievement there. And also Deputy Director of Clinical Quality, Roger Watson, who received a National Outstanding Service Award through the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives, which again, something very well received. Community First Responder David Smith, as you can see, the Scheme Coordinator for South Northamptonshire. He was presented with the High Sheriff's Award for valuable services to the community. We also, last year in November, held at the Leicestershire Football Club an EMAS reward and recognition event, which was an absolute fantastic event where over 200 of our colleagues attended, many of whom received awards where they were nominated by their colleagues and by other means. And we had a number of high-profile stakeholders who assisted on the event and helped us allocate those awards out, which was a great an event. We've also had 8 long service and retirement events, and they're an absolute fantastic opportunity for myself, my executive team, to meet many of our colleagues who we wouldn't ordinarily meet during sort of everyday organisational business, but we've been recognising sort of 10, 20, 30 year service, and in some instances an absolute phenomenal 40 years with the service. So something of huge pleasure and pride to be able to recognise our staff at those events. And then last but not least on the slide deck, we've received the Silver Award for Employer Recognition by the Armed Forces Covenant, something which we're absolutely really proud to have received. And since then we are now in the process of applying for the Gold Award, so something hopefully in due course we'll be able to update you accordingly. So a number of other areas I'd like to talk through. When we talk about how we communicate and engage with our workforce, being a very dispersed organisation where we have our workforce across the many counties of the East Midlands, covering a number of sites, so we have to use different types of methods and approaches to be able to engage with our staff. And we launched a new platform called Workplace, something which is very similar to the sort of the setup of Facebook, so something that many of our colleagues would be used to using. And we can see that 70% of our staff have already signed up and are effectively using that as a communication platform. So some of the feedback we've received of that has been really positive. So that's something we will continue to be using. Also, another really important initiative is around the Just Be, the proactive wellbeing check-in initiative, which we've offered to 100% of our frontline staff, and that is something which we'll continue to do so, because it's really, really important that we check in on our colleagues, making sure that their health and wellbeing is maintained as an absolute primary focus. Without doing that, they are unable to do their core job. We need to make sure that their welfare and wellbeing is truly supported. During the last period, and I will in a couple of slides' time talk about some of the pressures, one of the things that we had was staff welfare vehicles based at a number of the large acutes across the East Midlands, where our colleagues were unable to hand their patients over in a timely manner. I think something which has been quite well understood nationally around handover delays at hospitals when handing patients over for a variety of reasons. But what we've had in place there to be able to support our colleagues is these welfare vehicles where you can give people, a hot drink, sometimes a bite to eat, and also an opportunity to have a conversation and from a welfare and wellbeing point of view. So something again which has been very well received. Another area around staff support, and we have a number of staff networks which we, as it says, are going from strength to strength, something which we are very pleased to say. So we have the LGBT plus network, which was relaunched and attended 5 Pride events. Increased membership of the disabilities and carers and women's networks, and also the BAME network, which is engaging with our local communities, something which we know we have very diverse local communities, so we want to be able to do more to engage with the communities that we serve. And then also we had again, November of last year, the first men's health event, which was where a number of our colleagues were able to participate in sessions which were hosted to talk about some of the experiences where our male staff wouldn't ordinarily speak about, certainly from a health and well been, and I know that was something which was really well received by our colleagues. Moving on, slight change of topic, we were selected by the commissioners to run the non-emergency patient transport services in Lincolnshire from the 1st of July 2023. Absolutely fantastic for us, really delighted. Something very close to my heart because I started my ambulance career on patient transport and spent certainly a period of time on the patient transport side in Lincolnshire. We also rolled out 110 new emergency ambulances with updated features, and many of those updates have been based upon the feedback from our own colleagues as well as service users and others. And we also know the design of the vehicles has helped design the national specification of ambulance, which is something we are absolutely really proud of. And of course, with any new vehicle comes the latest technology and the latest equipment. So the more of these vehicles we have out on the streets of the East Midlands responding to our patients, that's a real positive thing. And we will continue to invest in our fleet and equipment and ensure that we will continue to have new vehicles. And talking of vehicles, so 54 new non-emergency patient transport ambulances in Derbyshire. And again, although a slightly different type of vehicle for a different purpose, again, high quality, high standard vehicle, which are really truly fit for purpose for the role that they perform. And we've also replaced all of the non-emergency patient transport service cars with fully electric vehicles. And of course, whilst that is absolutely a key area of ambition for us around our green ambition and our strive for net zero, it equally brings around new challenges. And that's something that we've had to work with our service users, our colleagues, to make sure that the vehicles are absolutely truly able to deliver the service that is required. And certainly the feedback we've received today has been very positive. So 22-23, I think it probably goes without saying we all understand the significant pressures that the NHS was under and continues to face. We certainly know that those pressures haven't gone away, and both the ambulance sector and the wider health and social care system are certainly under some real challenges. But we know during 22-23 it was a particular challenge for the ambulance sector, and most prominently was the winter period, where we had a significant period of sustained demand, high pressure, high activity, but also that was further impacted by our inability to hand patients over at a number of large hospitals across the East Midlands, and that caused a particular challenge around how we then respond to our patients in the community, because we do know that if we are unable to release our ambulances to be able to be on the streets in the communities, it has an impact on the length of time our patients have to wait, and ultimately around patient care, patient experience, and patient safety. So this is something that we're really working closely with the wider health and social care system to make sure that we can see further and sustained improvements. As we can see on the slide here, so we recruited and trained 999 call handlers. I'll just point out that is 999 as in emergency, not 999 call handlers. We now call them emergency medical advisors. Absolutely critical role, a very pressured role. Those people are the first point of contact into the emergency system of the ambulance sector. So a role which really does experience that pressure on a sustained basis. And we've also invested in new frontline crews, including paramedics, newly qualified technicians, specialist practitioners, and ambulance support crews. And there's a picture of some new colleagues who have joined the ambulance service. We've also to deal with some of the pressures during the winter period. We recruited and had in place a number of GPs and ambulance doctors continue to work shifts within our control room, working on what we call the critical care desk within the EOC, which is again really well received, and that gives additional support to our clinicians who are out there responding within the communities, and also can help with an enhanced level of care with our patients. We've also received additional support to continue working with local private ambulance provision, because whilst we have a long-term ambition to not have private ambulance provision, whilst we're in these periods of sustained demand, we will continue to work with other providers to make sure that we can have additional ambulance cover within the communities, and that's something that we've continued to do. And then also at the bottom there, and sometimes we forget with the passage of time the significant pressures that were further compounded by a period of industrial action within the NHS and certainly within the ambulance sector, and we benefited through the support of some Ministry of Defence colleagues to assist with the responding to low acuity calls during that period to allow our frontline clinicians to be able to respond to those high acute patients in the community. So thank you to all of those involved. What we also did was we successfully rolled out an electronic patient record system for all of our crews on personal issue iPad devices. So this is where they're able to, when they're responding to patients and completing the patient record system on these iPads, it's a high-tech piece of equipment which allows the patient records to be created in an electronic format and then handed over electronically at the receiving hospitals. Something which, whilst there will always be developments and advances in technology, something which has been certainly well received. And again, when I reflect back to some sort of 26, 27 years ago when I joined the ambulance service, where the fact that we didn't even have sat-navs or telephones or mobile phones on ambulances, and patient record keeping was on nothing more comprehensive than an A4 piece of paper. So that's certainly quite a significant improvement. But again, this is an area we will continue to invest in. We've also extended the body-worn camera project, supported the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives, and this was for our frontline colleagues who would wear or have the opportunity to wear a body-worn camera. Sadly, there are still too many instances where our colleagues are exposed to both physical and verbal violence and aggression, which is completely unacceptable, and we need to be able to do more to reduce and eradicate such examples of unacceptable behaviour. And by our colleagues having these cameras, it allows us to capture the evidence in a meaningful way, which can then be used to hopefully successfully prosecute any individual who will both verbally and physically assault our crews, which again, as I say, is completely unacceptable. We also secured just over $250,000 in charity grants to launch new volunteer projects and fund defibrillators and electric vehicles across the East Midlands. Again, something which we were very gratefully received. And we've done a number of blue light collaborations across the region. One of those is a new ambulance base, which is due to be open shortly in Newark, across the road from the existing ambulance station, but it's in the police station. So a particular building at the rear of the physical police station, which will be the new ambulance station. So great new unit for our colleagues to work from and be based from. So that once that is open formally, we will, we will obviously with pride work from that new venue. And we've also done a number of support and training events, and one of the ones which described is around the hazardous area response team, the multi-agency training which took place at Langley Mill in Derbyshire. So, some faces you may recognise from within the room this morning. So, welcoming a number of changes across the organisation. So, the first one we have is our new medical director, Dr. Nicole Atkinson, who joined us at the start of the year and has already had a real positive impact upon the organisation. And Nicole took over from our former medical director, Dr. Leon Roberts, who was obviously with us during the period of high sustained pressure. So a huge thank you for all of the support, direction, leadership that Leon gave to the organisation during his well-valued tenure with the Trust, and a warm welcome to Dr. Atkinson. We've also welcomed a new non-executive director, Jeff Worrell, and a new now non-executive director, Jackie Jones, who are both with us today in the room, and I'm sure we'll be pleased to answer any questions later. A couple of further changes. So Vijay Sharma, who's been with us for 9 years as a non-executive director, had a huge positive impact upon the organisation and has brought lots of wealth of experience to the Trust. Finishes with us at the end of this week, indeed. So we'll be sad to see Vijay leave us, but a huge thank you to what Vijay has done. And also we will be saying goodbye to Nicola Bramhall, the Director of Quality Improvement and Patient Safety, who will be leaving the organisation in at the end of November, and we're just currently in the process of recruiting to Nicola's replacement, which is something we will be enjoying doing, but it will be we'll be sad to see Nicola depart. Thank you. So just a very, and I'm not going to go through all of the detail on this one. What we have done is certainly under Karen's leadership direction as the chair of the board, as we've undertaken an awful lot of work around the revising our strategy. So the new strategy from 23 to 28, and we developed a plan on the page on a page which has a huge number of supporting strategies, and we're working through that level of detail now. These have been developed and designed with lots of input and support from our colleagues, stakeholders, both internally and externally to the organisation. So we're really confident that these will be reflective of the feedback and what our colleagues will have been telling us. So that's something which we're really keen to see deliver over the coming years. And one of those is around the clinical strategy. So I'm going to hand over now to Nicole Atkinson. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard, and it's great to see so many people in the room. So this is really just to give a bit of a description about how we're going about developing our clinical strategy. As Richard said, we have spent quite a lot of time and energy developing our trust strategy, and this really starts to describe how we might go about delivering that. And it focuses on 2 of the 5 ambitions that were on the original slide, really around sort of developing outstanding patient care, but also how we work in partnership with others to really support improvements in health inequality. So that's the real sort of aims and focus for this strategy. Thank you to everybody that has taken part in helping shape this, because it really has been a collaborative effort, from our patients to our staff, to our lots of feedback from our health and care partners, as well as sort of regional and national colleagues. It really has been a fantastic endeavour, and what we've tried to do is really capture the learning and really listen to what people have said, because what we find is that people know what the solutions are. We just need to work out how we enable them to put that in place. So again, there are a number of things that we'll be focusing on the strategy, things like improving joined up better patient pathways, working in collaboration with 111 colleagues, how we really start to improve clinical decision making on scene. There's a lot in there. It is quite a comprehensive strategy, but again, that's because we know that we really need to start to make sure that the jigsaw piece puzzles start to fit together. So what are we actually going to be sort of describing in this clinical strategy? Well, some of this is about how we work together with others to really start to think about how we keep people safe and healthy at home, which you might think is a sort of strange thing for an ambulance service to be, considering. Absolutely, we want to make sure that we get there in a timely fashion and can make an appropriate assessment of a patient. But we know that, most people actually can be supported at home rather than taken into hospital. And what's our part to play in that as a key member of our health and care systems? So I suppose the principle is really about how do we deliver the right care to the right person in the right place, which may be in their home or maybe somewhere else, but also at the right time. So again, some of this is about getting there in a timely fashion, but also making sure that we appropriately give them the clinical support and care that they need for their problems. So there'll be sort of 3 elements that we'll focus on. One is around assessment and actually doing a lot more at that front end. So how do we really start to understand how we support patients to get to the right place? And that might not necessarily be within the ambulance service. How do we respond to them so that we're sending the right clinical resource, the right clinical condition? And also, how do we make sure that if we do need to transport them, we're getting them to the right place first time? And again, it will cover the whole breadth of what we do. I think most people think about us as an emergency and urgent care provider, but at the other end, we provide major incident support, and at the other end, we have a very large planned care element to what we do, so around our non-emergency transport. So how do we think about that in the totality? Because actually, through all of that, we are having patient contacts and providing clinical care to our public. So there's a lot on this wheel. I call this the EMAS wheel, and I do like pictures because actually for me, sometimes it's easier to see, but I will describe it because I know that for some of us it might be difficult to visualise this slide. We're talking about the clinical operating model because actually it's really important. I think one of the phrases that we have sort of described this as is it isn't what you do, it's the way that you do it. So actually what is it that we're going to do in order to help us to provide this kind of high quality care. As I said, a major component of this is around major incident response, because actually we know from the Manchester Arena inquiries that there is a lot more that we should be doing across our systems to really support patients if, sadly, that we were needed to be deployed to an incident. We'll be focusing on sort of 10 sort of key areas within the strategy, and these have really been developed for two reasons. One is because our data tells us that this is what we spend most of our time doing, but also because we know that certain areas we will likely to have much more of a greater clinical improvement element to this if we work together with others. So again, how can we really collaborate to improve things? And every spoke of that wheel has partnership right the way through it, because actually we know that in order to deliver this, we can't work in isolation. So we'll be focusing on trauma, lung conditions, heart conditions, mental health, and also strokes and falls in one element. And then in another, thinking about population groups. So not necessarily clinical conditions, but groups of people, groups of patients that either need our support through maternity. How do we support people, our children and young people? How do we support patients at their end of life who may be frail, but also people that use our services a lot, so what we would call high volume service users, and thinking about each element of that assessment, response and transport approach as to how we might work differently in the future. As Karen said at the beginning, none of this will be possible without our clinical workforce. They are critical, and not just our clinical workforce, actually everyone that works within EMAS will need to play its part in delivering this strategy. How are we supporting the clinicians that will need to deliver this? Have we got the right number of different clinical skill sets within our organisation in order to support that clinical operating model and the delivery of care to those patients? How, as an organisation, are we really starting to think about what are the outcomes that we want at the other end? We measure ourselves in time. We do that because actually to get to certain patients in a timely way means they'll have a better clinical outcome. But how do we make sure that we're starting to marry the two together? So not only are we getting there in time, but we're making sure that we do the right thing for that patient when we get there. And I suppose last but not least is how do we start to play our part in improving health inequalities in our communities and populations? Again, it isn't something that we've traditionally done as an ambulance service, but I think very much we need to start to be thinking about how we play that role. And how do we make sure that every contact counts? We have the privilege of going into an extraordinary number of people's homes. We learn so much about them and their lives. Actually, how can we make sure when we're walking through that door, not only are we thinking about what their clinical need is, but thinking about the patient as a whole and what our part can be to play in that. So where are we at? We have done an extraordinary amount of going out and listening, and thank you for all the feedback that we've had. We are now building that into a draft narrative, a document that you'll be able to read, and that's hopefully going to our trust board in October. We will make sure that this is published. I am determined that this is not going to be a dusty piece of paper that sits on a shelf, but really we're starting to think already about how we go about delivering that. So what I would say is I think this is a really good opportunity for us to really do some great stuff for our patients as well as our staff, and I'm looking forward to getting cracking with getting on and delivering it. I'm handing over to Mike now, so
Thank you.
Bit of a different tact.
Just a quick summary of the finances. The full annual report and accounts are available for you to peruse at your leisure. The accounts I do recommend as an excellent read. Particular section on depreciation. If you ever got any sort of insomnia, it's brilliant to send you to sleep. But so what happened last year? We had £276 million annual turnover, so we spent a lot of money. All our financial targets were achieved, which sounds quite glib, but it was a very, very challenging year. If you go back to where we were, we had escalating fuel prices, and as an ambulance service, we do use a lot of fuel. We had a fractured supply chain, particularly around areas which involved use of chips, things like defibrillators, about our ambulances and things. So we had spasmodic deliveries, and even such simple staples as uniforms had problems with in terms of delivery of those. So lots of particular issues going in, but the main one for us was the handover delays, and that put an awful lot of financial pressure into the system. And for most of the year, we're bouncing around between surplus and deficit. And but we worked very closely with our commissioners, the other ICBs, and we developed a risk-sharing arrangement around the financial implications of the handovers, and that enabled us to bring a bit of financial stability into our accounts. and also to afford some of the consequences of the handover delays, particularly around overtime, additional PAS, etc. But on top of that, we achieved our financial targets. We managed the inflation, the handovers. We also achieved £7.1 million of efficiency. So what we're really doing, we're doing £7.1 million worth extra work for the same resources. So given the backdrop, that was an immense achievement. We invested 15.8 million of capital, 11.6 million in terms of straight cash, and the right of use assets of 4.2 million. For those who are interested, that's a revised accounting policy around a thing called International Financial Reporting Standard 16, which, if you want to know about it, I'll find somebody who can understand it and explain it to you. But very, very complicated. But that's about utilising the leases and the capital element of it. But it means that from leased vehicles, for instance, we recognise it as a capital investment. So the major investment's been accident emergency vehicles, as Rich said, 110 new ambulances. These are the latest model Fiat chassis, and they're on our roads now. So it made a big difference. So a third of our fleet, roughly A&E fleet, is now about a year old. So we keep maintaining the age of our fleet, and that improves reliability and patient experience, less breakdowns, etc., better fuel economy. We bought the patient transport vehicles, 3.2 million. As we mentioned earlier, we've got additional PTS contracts, and we're also renewing some of the fleet and existing contracts. We spent 1.7 million on information technology, a very key part for us, very, very dependent on IT. As Rich was saying earlier, when he started, there's no iPads and no sat-nav. When I started, there's no computers. So we just got a bit of a generational difference there. And then 2.5 million on estates, that is maintaining our estate, that keep it in a safe, particularly a safe environment, making sure we're compliant with legislation. So we finished the year with a cash balance of 18.2 million. So we've got quite a healthy cash balance. Slight increase on the previous year, and that means that we can keep our services going, even if we do get temporary sort of hits to our expenditure. Received 5.3 million pounds of COVID money, so a bit of a hangover from the COVID days. So that helped fund some of the costs of continuing with the COVID expenditure, particularly around private ambulances, etc. But importantly, the Better Payment Practice Code, the Treasury in particular, are very insistent that government departments, organisations pay their local suppliers quickly. We are a big supporter of the local economy. Where we can, we do invest locally. And the target there is to pay 95% of your local suppliers within 30 days. And you can see there that we hit 98.1 and 98%, so well above the target. So all our local suppliers, the small companies that supply into us, are receiving their money very promptly. And to such an extent that we actually got congratulated by the National Director of Finance on that performance. So it means, A, that we've got the cash to do it, but B, we've got the processes now to make certain our suppliers are paid quickly. And in these days of rising costs and inflation, that's been a great boon to our local economy. And we've made a very small surplus of 0.7 million. So we've about broke even, which is our statutory duty there. And then we just finish off that if you want the annual report and accounts, all available from on that website there, and free of charge. And they make a great doorstop if you want to print it off. I'll stop there and hand over to Richard for any questions. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And both Karen and I think Karen's going to pop and join me at the front here. We just want to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to everybody. That's all of our staff, all of our colleagues, all of our volunteers who absolutely day in, day out, tirelessly perform their duties in often very, very challenged and pressurised situations. So absolutely from the bottom of our heart, a huge thank you. We know that when we respond to our patients receive very high quality care. But we also know that for some of our patients, we don't get there as quick as we would like to do so. And for that, we are sorry. We want to be able to make sure all of our patients can get a response of the highest level, of in the shortest timescale possible. And that's why it's really important that we continue to do what we say, within the presentation today, but also work with our wider health and social care systems and our partners to ensure that we can continue to improve the services that we all collectively provide. So again, a huge thank you to everybody, all of our staff, all of our colleagues, volunteers across the organisation and beyond for everything that they have continued to do. And a big thank you to my team also, for the executive team, for their leadership. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Richard. And I would just echo that. We don't need to keep saying thank you. But if we can we move on to the questions now? Is that all right? Or have we answered all your questions?
Shall I be first?
Absolutely.
Right, it was wonderful to hear all what you're doing. You might remember last year we were critical of the news that the ambulance services were delayed with hospitals and why we were not using community hospitals more to transfer patients to community hospitals. And I had a response from the Derbyshire Community Health Service. They actually had 9 beds made available at Ilkeston Hospital and put it out to private tender. But at least it was developing in that way. And it's almost it hasn't gone away, but the sort of demand on ambulance turnover seems to have gone away a little bit from the news items. And I think this is all credit to what you're doing, to helping people transfer from hospital to home and so on. And the other bit, because we're now in the integrated care system as of July last year, which is statutory, where public health, NHS and the voluntary services are supposed to be working together as a community project, that now we've got non-emergency ambulance service. In Ashbourne we have Connex, who provide a voluntary service for people who need help to get to hospital. And I wonder how we can coordinate that service with what you're doing in a community development project, particularly in rural areas. So, because in Ashbourne, I call Ashbourne and district, and we have a very rural community, and it's how do you get to a doctor's service or even a hospital appointment and so on. And working together collectively would help considerably.
Yeah.
And this is the development, isn't it, of how we work in the community together.
Yeah.
Last week I sat as a delegate from Age UK Policy Review Board with the Deputy Director of the Department of Health and Wellbeing. I think the technicalities of it were living with long-term conditions was the theme, but as older patients, it is what do we need? And we need information. We need to know how to get what we need, where do we get it from and who we get it from. And the suggestion is to have a staffed information hub at every hospital so that we can understand, rather than just a piece of paper going fill it in. We need somebody to tell us, and we already have that system in place with Citizens Advice. Age UK in particular are very good at giving advice and help and information, but we need that more positive and collectively. So I'm not saying this is the first I've heard it, but the ambulance service are part of the community service and should be seen collectively in that way to provide information so that people can stay at home and know how to stay at home and know how to look after their health and conditions, and give information on where the benefits are, welfare rights, and we're all there together. And this integrated care system should now be seen to be operating, functioning as a community project.
Yeah.
That's my bit.
So thank you very much. Some really helpful comments there, and a couple of, if I may, I'll pick up on. So the one around the handover challenges at hospitals. You're absolutely right. We have seen some real improvements, and in some instances some real sustained improvements. Unfortunately, that isn't the case everywhere. So this is something which does continue to place some real pressure, because it's the sort of that variation within there where you will get some days where it does become a significant problem, and across the region some hospitals still have quite significant problems. So if we were to look at the trust overall, we have seen a reduction in the number of hours that get lost, but what we have seen is a spike a number of hospitals. So what we have to do is to make sure that where we're seeing the real improvements, we need to ensure that all systems can see that level of sustained level of improvement. But that we know that is a challenge. And as we go into the winter period, there is a high degree of probability that could deteriorate further. So this is something we've got to really work closely, because we know that ultimately that leads to patient harm, because if we cannot get to our patients in the community, then clearly there is a greater degree of risk placed upon them. Now, interesting, when you talk about the role of volunteers and support in the community, that's an area where We do currently work extensively with volunteers, but what we also have is a real ambition to extend those roles. So we will use more volunteers in the ambulance service moving forward, and not just in that sort of traditional patient response role. So we know our community first responders, they provide an invaluable amount of hours every single day, and clearly contribute to the saving the lives of patients. We also know there are people who want to volunteer within the NHS who don't necessarily want to kind of respond in a frontline patient way, and that's absolutely fine, because people can bring lots of different skills to our organisations and beyond, and that's what we need to expand those offerings. And when we talk about sort of like community roles around transportation, again, another example of where by working closely with those wider systems, we can really make sure there is an enhanced offering to some of those patients and members of the public. And information, it's a really key point, isn't it? Because we also know that many of our service users require their information to be accessible in different ways, and we can't simply have one type of information source or supply to our service users. So we need to be able to work with all service users, systems and beyond, and I think that's where like the role of the volunteers and the community hubs are absolutely invaluable, and we need to keep close to them. So thank you again for your comments.
And if I can just pick up on the point, I think when you started, you spoke about the hospital handovers and the development of the integrated care systems. I think certainly what we've witnessed as an organisation over the last 12 months is that collaboration and the joint working, which is so important, because the patients or the service users, as you'll appreciate, they don't fit into boxes wherever they are. And so therefore, and part of it, when we put the slide up about our strategy and we looked at those ambitions, and the collaboration and the way that we work together, together with the health inequalities agenda, are all now gathering momentum. And I think that joint working, that partnership working, is growing more now than I've seen in a long, long time. So I think it's going to take time. It will take time, but I think that partnership and the way that we putting the patient much more at the centre of the journey will help with that. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions, please?
It's not a question. Stuart Evans from Lincoln Knox Air Ambulance.
Hi, Stuart.
It's a thank you, really, for the support that we've had off of your staff for the last period. I realise we are a small organisation, we deal with a small area of your overall patient spectrum, but I'm very keen that any good news that we have becomes also an EMAS good news story, because ultimately they are your patients. We are investing in the clinical team, we're looking to provide more support, and I think looking at the 5 clinical pathways around cardiac and trauma, that I'd be more than willing for us to collaborate ever more with you and help in any way we can do to repay some of that magnificent support that we've had and I've seen in the short time that I've been with the charity. So thank you, and I'll definitely touch base to share that with you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your words, and thank you also for the support that you do provide every single day. Absolutely, absolutely appreciated and valued. So thank you, and we will take you up on that kind offer.
Brilliant.
And the patients will definitely appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi. I work for Nottinghamshire County Council, and an area that I work in is like mental health, and obviously the ambulance service needs to work quite closely with our the police and the approved mental health professionals to transport people safely to hospital when needed. But obviously it's an area that, again, we experience lots of delays in ambulances coming in a timely manner to transport, because we're all under pressure. You're under pressure, the amps are under pressure to, our assessments have gone up as well. So it's about, is there any work going on to try and improve the timescales around responding to requests for transporting people to hospital under the Mental Health Act, and how can we improve that area and work together more closely to think of creative, innovative ways that we can improve that for the person, for the ambulance service, and for the sort of the AMPs as well, really.
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. What I will just advance notice, I might bring Nicola in just to add a little further on the comments on this one. So we know this is an area nationally. There's rightly been an awful lot of increased focus about response to mental health patients. We know many patients will come into the ambulance, the 999 system, who have been experiencing a mental health crisis. Not all patients will necessarily present at point of call as having a mental health crisis. So there are sometimes the challenges of how, once we respond, it then becomes apparent and evident that actually we may not be the most appropriate type of service to be able to deal with those that the patient's needs. And what we need to be able to do is get much better at being able to identify at source the root cause of the call, and that's why by having trained mental health professionals within the control room supporting with the clinical assessments, they really have that skill and expertise. Also, working at a system level, this is really important that we don't just see this as an ambulance service challenge, but this is something that as a system where we have a multidisciplinary approach to how we respond to those patients in a timely manner, because we do know the longer these patients are waiting for transportation, the more likely there will be a negative impact on their patient experience and ultimately outcome. So we do need to be able to do more. Now what I will do is just ask Nicola to, just from a more specific point of view around mental health, actually leads in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the question. It's an area that we really do want to make sure that we have parity of esteem, so we put as much effort into our patients who present with a mental health condition as we do those with a physical condition. And we actually launched a mental health strategy. I think it was the year before last actually, but we have benefited from some of the national funding that has been released, the mental health investment standard funding. And there's really sort of three probably main sort of facets to our strategy. One is, as Richard said, sort of increasing our capacity and capability. That's both on our front line and in our control room to appropriately manage mental health presentations. The second is really around making sure that we have the right response. And so a couple of our areas are actually using some of the national funding to look at specific mental health response vehicles, and we're working in partnership with mental health trusts, with our commissioners, and indeed with the police on appropriate pathways and appropriate vehicles so that we can transport those patients, as you say, in a timely manner, but also in a safer manner.
And are we involved in those discussions as local authority? Are we involved in that?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And then the third one is around developing pathways, so working with those partners, including health and social care, to identify, because I think we recognise that as a regional provider we have access to a lot of really valuable information about when are people presenting, why are they presenting, are there gaps in the services that are available to them, and we're really keen to work with partners in each of our counties to identify where those gaps are and work with them so that we can develop those new pathways, so that we can respond in the right way, much as Nick said in terms of the clinical strategy. And you will have noticed that mental health was one of the strands as well that Nick mentioned. So although we have that existing strategy now, that will absolutely be further developed through the work that Nick is doing.
And I've got just one other, thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
One other question I've got is around safeguarding, because obviously the numbers of safeguarding referrals are significantly increasing into the local authority, and we get a lot of referrals from EMAS, which is appropriate because you're going into people's homes. So can I ask about what sort of training that crews receive around safeguarding? Because obviously some of the referrals are absolutely very appropriate, but other referrals are not so appropriate. So it's about how we support each other as a system as well, to make, a bit like mental health, to make sure that we're referring the right people to the right places really as well.
Yeah, thank you. So if I may, I'm going to ask, continue with Nicola for that response.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for acknowledging that the level of referrals is kind of appropriate and understandable. And I think that is the case because, the nature of the work that we do, we are privileged in coming into people's homes at a time when they probably haven't expected us to come in. So we do see an awful lot. And we've worked really hard with our crews to get them to understand their role in safeguarding, because it is everybody's business and they are in a very privileged position and have access to information that others probably are not privy to. On average, it's about 4% of our responses result in a safeguarding referral. So I know when we look at the numbers, it seems really, really high. Actually, as a proportion of the cases that we go to, it's not unexpected, I don't think, and we compare well with our peers. In terms of training, we do actually follow the intercollegiate guidance. So we are one of only a handful of ambulance trusts who do actually follow the guidance in terms of the levels of training that our staff have. So our frontline crews have level 3 safeguarding training. We also do audits of referrals so that we can feed back, because we don't just want the numbers of referrals, as you quite rightly say, we want the quality of referrals as well. And it's, we do try and work with our partners to get that feedback. So if there are significant numbers of what are deemed inappropriate referrals, and I sometimes challenge that, because I think our crews only see a snapshot. What they won't know is sort of like the wider information, and I think sometimes what they see can be contributing to a larger picture. So I would sort of challenge people that say that they're inappropriate referrals, but everything that we can do to try and drive up quality, we absolutely do that. So we sometimes do learning from event sessions so that we can, in a very simple way, get to a large number of our staff to provide some of those feedback. And our safeguarding professionals actually are often the ones who are leading some of those learning from event sessions to share some of that learning from the referrals that we've made, whether that's been a really good referral that's had a really successful outcome, or whether it's one that could have been improved. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. Any further questions, please, from anybody?
Anybody else?
We've got Stephen at the back.
Steve Baker, Chief Executive, Chief Healthcare. It's not a statement. Sorry, it's not a question, Richard and Karen. It's just a statement to follow on the gentleman's comments there. As a partner within the NHS and social care system across the East Midlands, I just want to say thank you and pay credit to the work that you do, Richard and Karen, and your executive and your board, and the whole colleagues across and volunteers of the EMAS team, because without you, patients would come to significant harm in our communities and in our hospitals. So from our perspective, you do a fantastic job. You're against some of the most unprecedented challenges our systems have seen. You work with our ICB and ICS partners incredibly well, and open and honest conversations. I think that's what's required at this time, to make sure that we understand the challenges you face and our NHS and social care partners face, and understand where we can address those challenges at the front line, really, and help our colleagues too. But you are incredibly open to partnership and collaboration, and that hasn't always been the case. Let's be frank, from our point of view, from a partner perspective, and I think you are open to change. You're open to look at innovation and see how you can do things better and support your colleagues to do things better. So just a huge credit to you and your team, and despite all the challenges, I think you and your colleagues do an amazing job for people across the East Midlands. So just a thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I know that will be well received by all colleagues, so really appreciate it. Thank you. So.
Mine is just information, because you mentioned digital inclusion and training staff up with iPads and so on. 2 years ago now, I was asked what could I use the new pavilion in Ashbourne for, and I said a computer hub. And we actually got 4 different volunteer organisations working collectively together to work for the benefit of the community. One provided the iPads and the computers, the staff, the publicity, the tea. We call it the Tea Talk Tech Cafe. That last year ran from July to this July, and it helped over 400 people to understand computers. And it was mainly for health and well-being that we wanted them to understand. And we have since now have another one opened a month ago in Wirksworth, and another one opened in Matlock. And it's collaborative with the Royal Action Derbyshire and other organisations, Citizens Advice, Citizens Online, and so on. And they're working collectively, collaboratively, to get people to understand computer literacy and iPads, mobile phones and so on. And there's that part of what you're doing now to come into that equation, to see how you could help us as we could help you in developing that IT skills across the county. It's one of these things that was an idea that we had an idea, and it's worked so well. And the T is the fact that the T talk is very important, because people need to talk about what they don't understand. The cup of tea and the biscuit is the first priority. So we have that, so we call it Tea Talk Tech, and it's working considerably well. And it's down to the voluntary services. At the moment we've got limited funding to provide that, but nonetheless it is there through voluntary services to help us to do that. So it's just something of those things that you can pick up on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And I know there's an awful lot going on out there which we can work closely with, and as indeed we can offer to some of those community groups as well. So thank you for that.
I might also add one more thing, that there's a governor, I'll keep pushing it, in Derbyshire Community Health Service. We actually got 100 iPads loaned to us because they bought them and didn't know what to do with them.
Right.
Seriously, 3 years ago, they didn't have a system set up collectively to implement that system into the health service for the benefit of the patient and the staff. Gradually, that is happening. But we now have, I know I've got 6 iPads, or not mine, our Tea Talk Tech Cafe in Ashgrove has 6 iPads to loan for a year to anybody who wants to understand. And then they'll decide to buy one, or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, and and again, some really good initiatives are taking place out there in the community. So thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to sort of draw any final questions before I hand back to Karen to bring the AGM to a closure. Karen.
No? Okay. I just want to say, really, from the bottom of my heart, a big thank you for coming today and listening to our narrative, and thank you to you for your questions, and also for your compliments. They are very much received, as I said. It's a difficult time that the NHS is going through, but it's good to hear that we're getting it right. We're not right all of the time, but we'll learn from when we're not. So thank you very much again, and thanks for joining us. If you'd like a drink or whatever before you leave, please help yourself. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.